Okay, so our module 2 is on environmental management basic concepts. So let's define first what is environmental management. So environmental management is the management of the interaction and impact of human activities on the natural environment. It is a purposeful activity with the goal to maintain and improve the state of an environmental resource affected by human activities. As we can see from module 1, that human beings greatly affects the environment. Now we need to preserve these resources. That is where environmental management comes in. So when we talk about environmental management, the main goal in here is to conserve our resources. So there are several characteristics of environmental management. One, it is mainly concerned with the sphere of nature that is affected by humans. So we could see from module 1 that the different spheres interact with the human sphere. Second characteristic, it takes cues from physical environmental sciences, social sciences, policy making, and planning. Meaning, environmental management is actually a multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary field. So it employs different approaches now. So that is our third characteristic. Environmental management calls for multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary approaches because it involves different disciplines coming from natural sciences, physical sciences, economics, and even social sciences. Now, the time scale involved is often long, and then the environmental concerns range from local to global. So this is the fourth characteristic of environmental management. So it means when we do environmental management, we are not looking into short-term solutions, but actually long-term solutions because we would like to solve the problems for a long period. Now, the environmental concerns range from local and global. So it means there are local problems as well as global problems. So most often, there are some global problems that you cannot find actually at the local level. However, there are also local problems that you could not find also at the global level. It means when we do environmental management, it should be site specific or it's not only it focuses on the context of a specific location. Next, it encompasses various paradigms of development. Environmental management, the main goal also is actually to develop. So as we move along, we will better understand what is development is. Next, it assists in identifying and addressing problems simultaneously. So in environmental management, where the first thing that should be done is actually to identify the problem. Now, once you have identified the problem, you can now develop solutions to address this problem. And lastly, environmental management supports sustainable development. So the main purpose now of environmental management, it supports sustainable development in pursuing a pattern of resource used to aims to meet human needs while preserving the environment so that needs can be met not only in the present but also for the future generation. What does this mean? So when we talk about sustainable development, it is a must that the development that we have at present should not compromise the resources of the future generations. It means what we are experiencing right now should also be experienced by the future generation. So what we are doing right now will affect the resources of the future. So that's why environmental management is an important element of sustainable development. So since we are talking about sustainable development, the ideal sustainability principle is defined this way. So providing for the needs of the present generation without compromising the needs of the future generation. So this is derived from the sustainable development definition of the World Commission on Environment and Development in the Brundtland Report in 1987. So you can see on your screen, there are actually three pillars of environment or sustainable development. So we have the environmental, the social, and economic. So the interactions of these three pillars actually will develop, will provide sustainable development. It will result in a sustainable development. So let's talk about the interaction first between the environment and the economy. So the interaction between the two, the main goal here is to have a sustainable economic development. It means the development that should we have the should not compromise yung ating environment or yung ating ecology per se. Now, the interaction now between social and economic, we need to have a equitable social environment. It means no person is left behind, as we all say. So it means all of the people in the world or in a certain place will have equitable opportunities, will have equal opportunities and equitable, um, they will receive, they will experience equity among others. Then lastly, the interaction between the environment and the social aspect. So in here, we would like to have a sustainable, natural, and built environment. So we could see that there is an interaction between humans and the environment. So in here, there should be a harmonious relationship between the environment and the humans. So therefore, the interaction of these three pillars will result in sustainable development. So that is the basic principle behind sustainability. Now, sustainability, these are the benefits or these are the things that we would like to preserve and conserve for the future generations. One, good environmental quality. So, of course, human beings want an environment conducive to living. So we would like to have a good environmental quality. Next, stocks of natural resources. So our natural resources are not infinite. So it means there will always come a time that your resources will be depleted. Next, we have the biodiversity. So our biodiversity, as we have discussed in Module 1, your biosphere actually provide of a lot of ecosystem services for human beings, from food, from medicine, and other resources, even your shelter. So it means we would like the future generations to also experience the ecosystem services that your biodiversity provides. Then lastly, your sociocultural resources. The traditional knowledge, the traditional ecological knowledge in particular, should be properly preserved, and so that the future generations will also appreciate these traditions and this or culture in which tradition is part of. So that is sustainability. Now there are several basic environmental management principles. So let's talk about them one by one. First, polluter pays principle or PPP and user pay principles or UPP. Now, polluter pays principle from the word itself, from the phrase itself, polluter pays. It means when someone pollute a certain area, this person should pay. So it means the polluter should pay for the pollution. So that is the principle in here. That's why when you go to a certain place, let's say you go to a tourism site, usually you will pay for an environmental fee. So this is actually the concept behind the polluter pays principle. So the principle behind the the principle behind the environmental fee is actually the polluter pays principle. So another related to this is the user pay principles. So same idea. So when the person use a certain resource, you have to pay for it. So these two are actually two principles that states that when some resources are being used, you have to pay for it. And when you pollute a certain place, you also have to pay for it. So this actually resulted to the what we call payment for ecosystem services or PES. These are actually your environmental fees in layman's term. Next, we have the precautionary principle. So for the precautionary principle, it says that the lack of certainty in a certain activity should not be an excuse for a procedure to be implemented. So it means everything, um, every activities that we have should be properly assessed so we could prevent the worst effects of a certain scenario. Next, we have the principle effectiveness and efficiency. And here, the main idea is our resources must be properly, effectively, and efficiently used or utilized so that we would not create wasteful resources. Then lastly, the intergenerational equity. So intergenerational equity is actually um, the same with the concept of sustainable development. So we would like in intergenerational equity, the idea in here is the present generation should conserve the resources so that the future generations will experience the resources that the present generation has experienced. In layman's term, kung ano yung nararanasan natin ngayon, kung ano yung napapakinabangan natin ngayon, dapat mapakinabangan din siya ng susunod na henerasyon. So that is intergenerational equity. You provide equitable resources, equitable opportunities for both present and future generations. However, if you will not take action at the present, the future will be affected. Because, example, we failed to conserve or preserve the resources that we have. Of course, the future generation will not be able to utilize the resources anymore because the failure is actually at the present generation. So it means the pressure now is on the present generation to conserve and do action to protect the natural resources. So in environmental management, there are different tools and approaches that can be utilized. So there are different levels and key approaches. In example, in terms of management at the organizational level, the approach in here is, of course, everyone should be compliant with the environmental laws and regulations, as well as create or develop environmental management systems. Now, for national and global levels, they are the same. They are tasked to implement, to monitor, and evaluate the compliance of environmental laws, policies, and commitments of the different organizations. So we could see in this table the level of management as well as the approaches needed for each level. So let's talk about now the different approaches. One approach that could be used in environmental management is the sustainability approach. So there are two types of sustainability approach or two kinds. So we have the neoclassical economic approach and the standard approach. So the first one, the neoclassical economic approach, it considers the capacity of the environment to provide goods and services as well as serves as sink for the waste produced by human economic activities. So the neoclassical economic approach, it considers actually your environment as one, it provides services. Second, it also serves as a sink for the waste done by human beings. So we have to weigh on this. So which matters the most? Is it the capacity of the environment to provide the goods and services, or is it the capacity of your environment to be as a sink of waste? Another approach is the standard approach. So this approach utilizes laws, rules, and regulations to restrict certain economic activities that have adverse impacts on the environment. So the standard approach is more likely what is being implemented now in most of the countries because they use laws, rules, implementing rules and regulations. Example, mining. So mining in reality is actually very, very destructive. So the government um, put in place laws regulating the mining companies so that the environment will not be greatly compromised with the activities of the mining. Imagine if we don't have that kind of law. So it means the mining companies can do anything they want in your environment. So if you will look into the internet, mining is actually very destructive. Next approach is environmental impact assessment and mitigation. So environmental impact assessment is a systematic process that examines the environmental consequences of development in action. So the emphasis in environmental impact assessment is actually on the preventive mechanisms. So in EIA, you predict what will be the impacts of a certain project. Then after predicting and identifying the impacts, you will now create solutions so that these impacts will be mitigated or at least reduced. Now, there are two natures of the EIA has two nature. One is it serves as a technical tool for analysis of the consequences of a planned intervention. This may be a policy, plan, program, project, providing information to stakeholders and decision makers. So the EIA will identify the consequences of a project. Now, if they are the impacts or the consequences of an intervention is already identified, therefore you can now create solutions on this. Next is your environmental impact assessment also serves as a legal and institutional procedure linked to the decision-making process of a planned intervention. So it will help actually your decision makers to develop laws or legal policies addressing the intervention. Now, from this point, we could see that environmental impact assessment has three purposes. One, it is an aid to decision making. It helps the policymakers to decide. Second, it serves as an aid to the formulation of development actions. It will actually help you to make your project or your intervention more, more meaningful and not destructive in a way, not destructive to our environment. Then lastly, it serves as an instrument for sustainable development. Why? Because you are identifying the impacts, then you will mitigate these impacts. So basically, you are now doing your part of the present generation, preserving and conserving our natural resources. Your environmental impact assessment has several methodologies to use. So it could be a combination of these methodologies. So you could use analogs, checklist, CBA or cost benefit analysis. You could consult experts. You could also use indices or indicators. Some use laboratory testing. You could also do risk assessment. You could also use GIS or Geographic Information System. Most agriculturists are using right now GIS in their farms. And you could also utilize the scenario building approach. So these are the methodologies being employed depending on, of course, the knowledge of those um, doing the environmental impact assessment. So you could utilize actually the combination of all of these methodologies. Now, once you have identified your impact, of course, it is a must that you do measures to mitigate or reduce these impacts. So there are three types of mitigation measures. We have prevention and control measures, we have compensatory measures, and we have remediation measures. So for the first one, this is how it works. So for prevention and control measures, you could fully or partially prevent an impact or reduce a risk by the following. One, changing the means or technique. So if you believe that your activity is detrimental or will be destructive to the environment, it means you can now change. You can change your methodology. Probably there are other ways for you to do the activity without compromising your environment. Another is changing the site. So it means if you identified, let's say, your area or your project is actually located in a protected area, therefore, you could move. Probably you could adjust or you could move your project location into a different location. Next, specifying operating practices. So by this, by identifying the impacts, you could identify what are the practices, good practices that you can do in your operations. So we have an example here. So prevent contamination of wells by seating wells a minimum distance from the latrines, or operate wastewater treatment for a coffee washing station. So this is an example of a prevention and control measure. Second type of mitigation measure is the compensatory measures. How it works. So it offset adverse impacts in one area with improvements elsewhere. So it means, let's say, you cut down trees in for road widening. You cut down the trees. Now, if the area is will experience adverse effects, in return, what you will do is you will compensate what has been lost. So how can you do that? So you will now plant trees in a new location. So that is a compensatory measure. So another example for this is plant trees in a new location to compensate for clearing a construction site. Last type of mitigation measure is the remediation measures. So it works this way. You repair or restore the environment after the damage is done. So you do now activities, you develop technologies or remediation measures after it was already been done. So an example is you regrade or you replant a barrow pit after construction is finished. So we can see now that environmental impact assessment and mitigation is helpful when you develop a certain project. Another approach in environmental management is putting in place your environmental management systems. So what is an environmental management system? It is the management of an organization's environmental programs in a comprehensive, systematic, planned, and documented manner. So in environmental management, it monitors the environmental performance. It is similar on how a financial management system monitors expenses and income. So the difference in environmental management system, the focus is on the environmental activities. Now, environmental management system is intended for integrate environmental management into a company's daily operations, particularly in terms of long-term planning and other quality management systems. So that is environmental management system. Now, in environmental management system, there is a specific framework that is being followed. We call it as the PDCA cycle, or that is plan, do, check, act cycle. So the first thing first is you need to create your plan. So how can you do that? You identify, you have to develop your environmental policy, then you set your objectives and targets. Why you are doing that environmental management system. Next, you do training and communication. So this time, you will train your employees, you will train all stakeholders involved, you will communicate with them so that they will be aware of the policy that you are implementing. Then, next, you have to check. You have to check if the activity or if the policy is being implemented properly. So you do monitoring, you do you measuring, you record, and at the same time you audit is everything is in place. Now afterwards, you now act. Now it is important that you do reviews of your policies, of your management system, because this is the only way for you to identify if there are some problems encountered, and now you will address this problem so that you could improve your policy or your project that is being implemented. So the cycle goes back with planning. So from the learnings that you have, from what has been identified, you will now create now new objectives and targets, and so on and there and so on and so forth. So that's why it is called a cycle. So you have to remember this because you could always apply this in not just only environmental management, but into other systems. So that is plan, do, check, and act. So this cycle, actually, this framework, it enhances the effectiveness of environmental management programs by formalizing a systematic approach and engaging the entire organization at all levels. So it means everyone is included in the management. Next, the framework actually increases the potential for savings and key areas by implementing the essential element of efficient use or conservation of resources, such as water and energy. Example, if a certain company or a certain organization actually implements the use of email in for the information dissemination or for giving out memos rather than printing it out and providing it to the employee, it will actually save you the cost for your paper because you do it actually online via email. So it means from there you could actually save money while you are actually saving yung ating nature. Then lastly, it enhances market potential through enhanced reputation. Of course, it will provide a good reputation for the organization because they do much in protecting our natural resources. Another approach that you could do is the environmental valuation and accounting. So let's start with environmental valuation. So in environmental valuation, it deals with the environmental gains and compensations for environmental losses. So these environmental gains and losses can be investigated as an environmental benefit. Now, how can you do a valuation? So in reality, the resources don't have actually price, don't have actually what we call the market value. So why there's a need to do valuation? It's because the policymakers actually appreciate it more or understand it more in monetary terms. I'll give an example. So let's say the Philippine Eagle. So let's say we will talk to a certain congressman talking about conserving the Philippine Eagle. So by merely saying to the congressman that, sir, congressman, we need to conserve the Philippine Eagle because it will help us, or there are actually endemic species. By using that kind of explanation, most probably the congressman will not be able to understand it and might reject the proposal that you are giving him. So rather than this scenario, so example, sir, if we will preserve we will conserve the Philippine eagle, we could actually conserve, or we could actually uh, save 10 million pesos in 10 years time. So by that manner, the congressman would actually probably approve your budget because they are looking into the monetary terms. I'm not saying that your policymakers are actually focused on monetary terms, but they will understand it more by using that kind of value. So in this way, you could actually identify the your services into use benefits, non-use benefits, and stewardship benefits. So your use benefits, these are actually the benefits that you directly gain from the environment. Non-use benefits, these are the benefits that you indirectly gain from the environment by another activity, most probably. Then stewardship benefits. So these are the benefits by doing preservation, conservation activities. So these are the things that you need to value. So how can you do that? There are different approaches that can be employed. Now, your environment, it provides several services. So it, as seen in your screen, it serves as resource inputs to production. It could serve as sinks for waste. It can give life support services as well as amenity services. So these things need to be valued in monetary terms by doing some measurements. So these are just two of the valuation method that we could do. One is the willingness to pay, or WTP, and next is the willingness to accept. So willingness to pay, it actually asks you how much you are willing to pay so that you could preserve the benefits. So example, the Philippine Eagle, as I mentioned a while ago, it doesn't have a value. Now, how can you give the Philippine Eagle a monetary value? Because you cannot, the Philippine Eagle is not actually being sold in the market. So basically, it doesn't have a value. But how can you give now a value to it? So by merely asking human beings or the locals how much they are willing to pay to conserve this. So the amount that is being provided, that is actually the value now of the eagle. So that is the concept of the willingness to pay. Next, we have the willingness to accept, or WTA. So this time, it is actually somehow converse of the willingness to pay. The willingness to accept is how much you are willing to accept to forego the benefits. So by providing the amount, it will now be converted into a monetary value of a certain benefit that you are experiencing. That is what we call valuation. Now, after doing the valuation, you need now to do the accounting. So the accounting is you actually compute for the benefits and the cost of a certain environmental damages or environmental damages. So in here, the concept of accounting is similar when you do a farm budget or when you compute for a return on investment. So isn't it when you do return on investment, you will identify what are your expenses and what are your income. So by doing the subtraction, that will now be the amount. So it means you could identify if the project is worth, or your farm project is worth, or nalulugi ka na. So that is also similar to this concept. So but in here, you're not just only accounting for the money itself, but you are also accounting for the damages, the benefit and the cost of the damages in a certain project. So your environmental accounting actually, it provides indicators and how much the government is earning by way of taxes for the use of natural resources, and how much of it goes directly to the private sector as a profit. So your assets can be expressed into physical accounts or to monetary accounts. So when we talk about physical accounts, these are the physical quantities or measurements, tons, yan, grams, kilograms. Monetary accounts, okay, you use actually the monetary units. So peso, dollar, or whatever you would like to use. Environmental accounting provides essential technical information for monitoring and policy analysis, as well as provides framework for an information system about balancing framework and information system about balancing environmental protection and economic activities. This is actually the benefit why we are doing the environmental accounting. So environmental valuation and accounting always come hand in hand, because when you do the valuation, you will now further do accounting. And last approach. The last approach is the stakeholder participation in environmental management. So in the principle 10 of the Rio Declaration, it states that environmental issues are best handled with the participation of all concerned citizens at the relevant level. So this viewpoint is also further reiterated by the Johannesburg Declaration that restated that the need for broad-based participation in policy formulation, decision-making, and implementation at all levels, as well as the need for more effective democratic and accountable international and multilateral institutions. So um, this viewpoint, you could see that everyone should be involved in environmental management. So, an example, when there's a certain bill that is being proposed, before it will become a law or before it will be called as an RA or Republic Act, they consult actually the people. So they do public consultation. They do public consultation also before they will approve a certain implementing rules and regulations of a certain House bill or a certain Republic Act or a certain memorandum. So this is how the stakeholders participate now in the management. So that is same is true with the environmental management. So when you do environmental impact assessment, it is or any approach, it is always important to involve the people. Example, in the Mount Arayat National Park is one of the first national parks as declared by the NIPAS Act. So this national park, it actually being managed by the what we call the Protected Area Management Board or the PAMB. Now the PAMB's composition, it includes the academe, the private sector, the LGUs, then and also the farmers or the all of these stakeholders that are certainly involved. We call it as a multi-stakeholder approach. Now, participation is very much important in here because when we talk about participation, it is a voluntary process in which people, including marginal groups, influence and share control over priority setting, policy making, resource allocation, and access to public goods and services, including the environment and the natural resources. So when we need to we need to ask the participation of the people when you are doing the management. So there are two types of participation or stakeholder participation in to be specific. So one, collaboration and decision making. So in here, primarily the way of the participation of the participants or the way of the participation of the stakeholders is by merely involving them in the planning process and decision making process. So example, we will be implementing a certain policy. Now you consult the people. So that is collaboration and decision making. Now another type of participation is the joint empowerment or shared control. So this joint empowerment or shared control has a deeper participation. In what way? So this time, you now involve the people or the stakeholders not just only on the planning process or decision making process in identifying what may be the solutions that you need or intervention that you need to do, but also involving these stakeholders in implementing your project or your intervention, as well as by asking them to help in the monitoring and evaluation of the certain activities. So this in this way, you are now empowering them not just only as stakeholders, but you are also empowering them as stewards of your of the environment. So the participation in terms of joint empowerment or shared control has a deeper commitment as compared to the collaboration and decision making. So what we have discussed, these are actually the approaches that could be used in environmental management. Now let's have a quick review. So environmental management, it supports sustainable development. Now there are several basic principles of environmental management. These are polluter pays principle and user pay principles, precautionary principle, principle of effectiveness and efficiency, and intergenerational equity. We also talk about the different environmental management tools and approaches that can be used We have the sustainability approach, the environmental impact assessment and mitigation, the environmental management system, environmental valuation and accounting, and lastly, the stakeholder participation. Now, that concludes our Module 2 on environmental management basic concepts.